Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Organizations' internal networks are overly permissive and can't distinguish trusted from untrusted applications. Attackers abuse this condition to move laterally through networks, bypassing address-based controls to spread malware. Edgewise abstracts security policies away from traditional network controls that rely on IP addresses, ports, and protocols, and instead ties controls directly to applications. Edgewise allows organizations to analyze the network attack surface and segment workloads based on the software and how it's communicated. Edgewise monitors applications and protects data paths using zero trust segmentation. Visit edgewise.net/Security Weekly to get your free month of visibility. Some restrictions apply. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/PSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Now we have to be serious because it's the security news. Dude, there's no way no matter how much breathing you do, there's no way we're going to be serious. I'm just throwing that out there. Did I have an announcement for this segment?
Are we starting a new trend? We're gonna go for serious?
No, I'm just joking. I'm totally not gonna be serious. I'm skipping. I'm gonna jump right. Let's talk about something. Let's go
right to the news.
Right to the.
Let's talk about pop music.
Pop. Was that a story we had this week about pop music?
No.
No.
No, it's a song.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyway, there's 7 new Spectre and Meltdown attacks uncovered by security researchers. Now, what I found was the most interesting part of this story was a quote from the story said that both ARM and Intel said that these new attacks can be mitigated by previously reported methods. My comment on that was, right. That's what you said before. And it wasn't true. Intel. I don't know about ARM's case, but I know definitely Intel, there was multiple things. And so basically what I gleaned from the story was, yeah, there's new attacks, and the chip manufacturers and different architectures basically said, yeah, it's not a big deal. Like, we got that covered. And I'm like, I don't believe you. I'm sorry. Like, the whole history that we have with Spectre and Meltdown attacks has not looked good for you, Intel. Like, you issued patches that caused performance issues, that didn't work, that caused system crashes.
It made it less secure.
But now there's 7 new attacks, and they're like, no, everything's fine. It's like a Jedi mind trick. Like, hey, there's no Spectre and Meltdown.
Well, I'm just curious, is this going to be the last round? Because this was the study was called A Sound and Extensible Systemization of Transient Execution Attacks. That sounds like it should be the end-all, be-all
it should,
of Spectre
but you know
Meltdown.
It's not.
I know.
Because every so often we read about Spectre and Meltdown. Like, it's like the vulnerability that refuses to go away, or set of vulnerabilities that refuses to go away.
Zombie vulnerabilities, 2018.
But we're not talking about Heartbleed anymore.
Well, we're not talking about it, but it's still out there.
Most people aren't talking about Heartbleed, though I still hear it come up in conversations here or there.
I think we should be talking about it.
You think that's still a thing?
It's definitely still a thing.
It begs the question, how long do some of these major vulnerabilities stick around in people's networks?
Forever.
Like, I really do think. I mean, I remember a few years ago covering that, like, the SQL Slammer worm was still
out there.
a lot. And I don't know what the data looks like today, but, like, still out there, right?
Still out there. Once something exists on the internet, it will never go away.
It will never go away. Yeah. I mean, and it's, you know what's really weird, now that we talk about this, is that as I do briefings with vendors and talk to people in the security community, one of the things that I've heard recently is, oh, by the way, as attack tools and techniques mature, and let's just talk about defense for a moment, as we look at ways to defend against those, we're constantly iterating, right? Like, what's the latest attack? Oh, what's the latest variation on that attack? Let's generate the latest defense. But then if you circle like all the way back to the original attack, those are now successful because we've changed the detection and protection mechanism so much that we've now allowed like the original attack, like a PW dump or something, for example, like a Windows, password dumping tool, now bypasses all these detection mechanisms because it's so old. Carlos, are you seeing this? You work for Trusted Sec, in a group that would pay attention to something like this. Were you aware of this and you're looking into, like, if you go way back in your tool set, like, does stuff work?
Yeah, in fact, I actually have a case from today. We were using some old techniques that actually came from my days from Windows 98, Windows NT4, where we were using JScript and VBScript, and it actually worked pretty well. We're seeing this. The old is new again. So we're seeing a resurgence like HTAs. They still work. How old are HTAs? Very old.
What is that? HTA? What is
HTA.
HTML-enabled
applications.
Sorry, you guys both spoke at the same time. What was that? Carlos?
HTML applications, HTA files.
HTA files. Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so they're still working. They still work to this day, work very well. You still need to code your stuff in VBScript and JScript.
Mm-hmm.
Macros, they're old as hell, and they still work very well.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft, for some reason, doesn't want to put deny as the default, so we just keep abusing it. CHM files, they still work. And they work very well also.
What's a CHM file? What is that?
Those are the help files that you use to click and open kind of like a very nice window for you to click on stuff.
Yeah, it was like a really pretty interface,
like, help
right?
me with TCP/IP, and you open the little...
It was a pretty interface, but it provided no help to me whatsoever.
Yeah, they are compiled HTML.
Mm.
So those are CHM files. They used to be help files in Windows. And people used to put up books in those back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. But we were just talking about going back into the 90s. Yep.
Yeah. So that still works. COM objects started in Windows in 1998. But Windows 98 was the first OS that actually came integrated with COM objects. We're still abusing that. WMI started and.
But wait, didn't COM objects also around the same time of OLE or object linking and embedding? We saw a trend with that recently too, or somewhat.
And
recently.
ActiveX.
Yep.
Yeah. In fact, when you want to use COM objects in JScript, you're actually still leveraging ActiveX. A good way to actually bypass AMSI completely, a Microsoft way of intercepting stuff to the engine is just to use the JavaScript engine with ActiveX from IE, and you bypass AMSI completely. And ActiveX, super old technology. We're still using COM objects. WMI is a COM object, super old. So yeah, and today we were doing that with JScript. I was talking with one of the guys, Jason Lang, a good friend of mine. And we're going like, hey, Carlos, I want to run this, but most the CDR that it's on the target box, if I do net add user, it's going to flag on it. If I use this other technique, it's going to flag on it. Any command line tool that I run to add this user, it's going to flag on it. And I cannot run WScript because VBScript, Windows scripting host is blocked.
Yep.
And we came out with a very old version of HTA and WinNT and JScript, and it worked beautifully on the target box, and we're like, awesome.
Wow, so you can add new users with this older technology, because I feel like this is mostly valid in commercial software. To protect backwards compatibility, vendors like Microsoft and others have to support this legacy functionality to not piss off customers. It largely in open source, Carlos, do you find this isn't the case? I feel like open source projects tend to just move more forward and screw backwards compatibility. Do you find commercial versus open source?
They do complete platform changes, and we're moving from this to that, and we're changing it completely. Now, one of the problems in open source, which is actually surprising, I was talking with one of my coworkers who's an ex-NSA operator, and we were talking about what is his favorite playground, and he was telling me, in the case of Windows, there's so much EDR, so many stuff hooking everywhere, but when it comes to Linux, nobody's looking there.
It's
Linux
true.
Is still,
it's true.
It's still early
Yeah.
2000s in terms of defenses, and the problem is that everything in the cloud actually runs in Linux.
Yep.
And I was kind of like, you know what? You're right. And he was kind of like, and you remember back in the early 2000s that everybody was attacking Cisco devices, Juniper devices, all this stuff. That's making a resurgence. For example, Cisco now includes a Python interpreter inside of their big boxes and iOS. So and we were playing around with it, building an actual agent that we can run in a Cisco box using Python. We're like, this is feasible. This actually works.
You know what's interesting? Security Weekly today is doing a lot more briefings with vendors to understand what they all do for various reasons. One, to bring to you as the listeners, right? And so many vendors are very, very focused on Windows and Active Directory security. And I mean, don't get me wrong, rightfully so. Most enterprises today, right, Fortune 1000, whatever in the U.S., are really Windows shops. And my whole thing being like a Unix, Linux nerd, I'm like, exactly what Carlos is saying. I'm like, well, what about Linux and Unix? Like, what are we doing? And so when I find security vendors that are focused on Linux, I get like really excited. And because I think it's one of the things that we're kind of forgetting about. And one particular vendor that I have a really high degree of confidence with based on my experiences so far, and I haven't tested out their platform yet, is Polyverse. And I was excited because their mission is to secure Linux systems. And as Carlos said, like in the cloud and in containers, they're largely using Linux systems. And what Polyverse is doing is basically giving you a custom feed of your packages for your Linux distribution that are all compiled with the address layout randomization feature and all the security features in the compiler, and giving you a unique set of packages that have different address layout randomization features, so that if someone tries to a buffer overflow, like they're in a world of hurt to try and make that actually execute because they've compiled it specifically for you. So I like vendors like that because I feel like we're kind of in a way forgetting about Linux security altogether, and I'm like, we can't forget about that. It's the underpinnings of so many things. Jeff.
Well, I have two thoughts. The first one is just a general question to the group. What's more surprising to you, that a lot of these old techniques, these old vulnerabilities, these old tricks are working, or that you're surprised that they're still working? My second comment, based on what you were just saying about Linux, when in our history was Linux security a focal point? And that's not a flip question, it's a serious question. When was Linux security actually a focal point?
On the first one, what actually surprises me is one of the problems of immaturity that we're seeing in the industry. When you go to conferences, the first thing that they'll tell you, either DEF CON used to do it, Blue Hat still does it. They go like, we only want exploit, we only want sexy. Let's say that you're submitting a CFP. So that's the only thing getting attention. Like, the only thing getting attention is the sexy. The only thing getting attention is what makes a headline. As an industry, now we are seeing people going to us like, hey, and we see it in the emails that we get, like, hey, how can I be a rock star? And the only way that they can be a rock star is they come up with new stuff. And the new stuff is what's getting all the attention. The new stuff is what's getting blocked. And that's one of the things I actually like about the attack framework. There are several things that I don't like that have come from it, but one of the major things that I like is that when you go through the list of stuff in the attack framework, all of that stuff is old. Double my permanent events. I've been using double my permanent events for persistence for many, many, many years. And now is when Microsoft's actually logging it and actually putting controls into it. And why are they doing it? Because APT 28 started doing it, and Mandiant made this whole media bliss around them tracking APT 28, and that got a lot of attention. Now we're going to focus on it. Again, that mentality of going after the sexy. So if it is sexy, it gets addressed. If it is not sexy, it doesn't. A lot of the old stuff is not as sexy.
Well, Jeff, hold on. To answer your other question, I think we lost sight of Linux and Unix security in two different points in our history as IT and security. I think the first point was the shift to cloud, where the platform, right? Well, first was cloud, right, and virtualization, where the platform was almost kind of abstract. We could spin up new instances kind of at will, where we didn't have to rack and stack a physical box, lock it down, harden it according to guidelines. The second shift is into really containers and then ultimately serverless, where the shift is more about applications and less about the security of the Linux operating system that's supporting those containers and serverless environments. And I think we've lost sight of that.
Linux actually has very good controls in it. Audit D kicks systems butt any day. But when I did my class at Black Hat and I covered the segment on post-exploitation, and I asked all the pen testers, how many of you, when you get into a Linux box, you check for Audit D? Nobody raised their hand.
Yeah.
Okay, how many of you actually, for the defenders, how many of you actually configure Audit D? Nobody raised their hand. And go like, okay, who here runs OS Query? 2 hands out of 150 students. I'm going, damn. How many of you red teamers do you look for OS Query? None. I'm going, damn. And I felt like a curmudgeon going like, well, in my tradecraft, I always check for that stuff. I have it automated. Right. Then again, I'm retentive of post-exploitation and proper tradecraft. That's kind of like my branding, my who am I. But I was actually very, very, very surprised. Like not even process auditing, something that almost every Windows admin, when they want to secure the box, they enable process auditing. We don't see that on the Linux side. And it was at some point when they moved to cloud, containers were spinning up a bunch of machines, running them. And then that notion like Linux is secure, Linux doesn't get hacked, Linux doesn't get attacked. That BS that we still see in forums, that we still see everywhere, is still rampant nowadays.
And it's awful. Having worked for Tenable and looking at the vulnerability landscape as a whole, and having people tell me like, there's a lot of vulnerabilities in Linux that really haven't come to light yet. And that there's a lot of specifically privilege escalations that are in Linux that are inherent to the architecture that are going to come to light. And someone told me that several years ago, and you fast forward to today, and you look at a lot of the exploits coming out for Linux, so many of them are of that privilege escalation, of that, not even a buffer overflow, but ways to gain system privileges or gain execution on a system that doesn't necessarily revolve around doing a traditional buffer overflow. I'm like, I still feel like we have a long way to go to secure Linux, and it's not a focus today, which is very concerning to me.
Well, and I appreciate so much what Carlos was just saying about the tendency of so many of the hacker conferences, because I've been to so many freaking conferences the last couple of years, and I hear and I see the same thing that Carlos sees in terms of the talks that get called for, it's got to be new, it's got to be sexy, and this is something that I think we all of our listeners and all of us that are in this industry, we need to pause and take seriously, because we are effectively creating the environment that allows all these things that we've just been talking about to persist, and nobody knows about it to persist. I mean, the fact that nobody's looking at Linux, I mean, in the early days of Linux, it was, and I think it's in a lot of ways been the case for much of Linux's history, the predominant operating system that was out there was Windows. It wasn't that we could argue whether Windows was more insecure or not. They're different platforms, they're different architectures, but the prevalence, just the sheer number of Windows devices that were out there made that the easy target, because that's where you could have success, that's where you could be a rock star. And I've thought from I don't know 20 years ago, what happens when people start focusing on Linux? Is it really that much more secure, or Unix is an operating system. It doesn't matter what flavor. But in as much as we as an industry and we as a hacker community in particular keep promoting the sexy, why should we be surprised at all that we're having this conversation?
So 2 quick things before we move on. I go to a lot of conferences too, and I have noticed the trend of the O days being the new sexy, and lots of talks about them, and we are definitely moving away from that now. This year has been completely different from last year. This year has been more about soft skills and even like some like health issues for hackers, like at DerbyCon with the village. And Wellness Village, with Bo Sister.
And a couple of mental health talks, I believe.
Totally. I mean, we're moving towards a more holistic type of hacker. So the second thing I want to do before we move on to more news is I think that I disagree with you a little bit, Paul. I think that
Thank God, finally someone disagrees with me. Damn it. Or disagrees in general on the show.
I'm going to disagree publicly with you.
Good.
Not just in the back room. That I think the first shift that we saw for Unix, I'm going to go not Linux, but Unix security was with Solaris, when Solaris went from closed source to open source. I think that was a brilliant move. I think it was a good move. We understand the risks between closed source and open source, but open source ultimately I think makes a better product, and I think that doing that prior to cloud, prior to all these other more modern things, I think that shift made a big difference. And Red Hat was really big on security when they were, just. I unplugged. Hold on.
It's okay.
Sucks when you unplug.
Right. I'm back. And I think that Red Hat really went. They were a commercial organization with
around
Linux,
an open source product,
right? But they were really pushing for security as an organization. So
well, I think Solaris was too little, too late, right, to the game. I think Linux ate into their market share for so long.
Solaris for life.
I was
System 5.
I was a Solaris sysadmin.
I was too, Joff, right? Like at university when I started in 2001, man. There was
I almost got the tattoo.
There was no Linux, right?
No,
like
there was no.
If you mentioned
you had
Linux,
HPUX, you had Solaris, and they were all. I mean, they were.
I started at university in 2001. If I mentioned Linux, I was laughed out of the room. Out of the room.
Linus Torvalds was still telling people how to pronounce Linux back then.
Yes.
So
yes.
like it was not a thing.
To the time that I left the university in 2007. They had almost fully completed their migration to Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
I just
it's amazing
think it's weird that it's not me having the geek out old timer moment right now. It's you guys. But keep going.
Okay, look, I got to say one thing though that I got to get in there before we finish this conversation. That is just this. Literally this week, I was actually doing an assessment where I started with Windows and then I moved over to a Linux system to do much of that assessment. So there are customers that are asking us.
But here's what comes full circle.
Linux systems.
If it's a Solaris system running on a Spark architecture, good luck exploiting that shit. Today.
Not true.
Today.
Not true.
You don't have a shell code. That's the problem. You don't have any
your shell code that runs on Spark is probably...
Well, getting it to compile when you had to have the Solaris compiler was a whole...
Yes.
Yeah, that was a whole different problem, but there are still... I mean, I'm not going to say there aren't vulnerabilities in HPUX and Solaris.
We all keep geeking. I'm loving
Holy crap. This could be a whole different podcast about...
We're going to have a whole podcast on Linux security, baby.
Linux and Solaris.
Actually, we should call it Unix security.
Unix, just the whole...
So, this all comes from us having used computers before, but in Japan, the cybersecurity minister has never used a computer.
And this just floored. So based on the conversation hold on. Now, based on the conversation we just had, right? We established that those of us on the panel today are old, first of all. Secondly, we've used a Unix operating system, right? And been administrators in that operating system, which
prior to Linux,
which gives us I was using both at the same time. Yeah.
Yo.
street cred, but having
only
lived
to a very small group.
I'm sorry, having lived through that gives us a certain insight into operating system security and the issues that they're all dealing with today. You fast forward to today, good Lord,
it's a certain amount of bondage.
It is a
bondage or bonding. That's
wait, hold
totally
on.
different.
Bonding and bondage are two totally different things, Jeff.
I stand by what I said. Keep going.
Okay. So Japan's cybersecurity minister admits that he's never used a computer. Now, on the plus side, hold on. Now, we may criticize.
My first question is, how's he getting his porn?
Apparently, it's through proxy.
Through his assistant.
Assistants telling his assistants to go.
I give instructions to my aide, and so I don't punch into a computer myself, he said, of his relationship with technology and his current role. But I'm confident our work is flawless.
I tell you what.
So there's an admin out there with a credential for this very important person. I've never seen that before. Go ahead.
Well, no, hold on. So I think it's interesting. One of the ways that we learn about technology and are able to understand it and advise people is that we've used that technology. And this isn't everyone. So me personally, as many of us, of you who've listened to this show know that when I talk about a technology and I really feel confident about it, is because I've used it, right? And I don't feel that level of confidence with every technology, but as containers, for example, I had to go do a project and learn how containers worked and be hands-on with it before I could really speak, I think, intelligently about it. And that's not a lot of people can do that differently and have a level of advice and expertise in something, but I have to work with the technology.
Can you imagine being a business owner and not using a computer for 43 years of owning a business?
Right, and now you put that in the context of I've never used a computer, that's alarming, but what the other side of that is someone on Twitter said, well, if a hacker targets the minister, Sakadora, they wouldn't be able to steal any information because he doesn't use a computer. It's the strongest kind of security. He doesn't use a computer.
He's an air-gapped executive.
Air-gapped executive. That speaks volumes to security. To be secure, don't use computers. That's the message here.
It's such a great acronym, too. AGE, right? Air-gapped executive.
So,
also, old.
How confident are we in the 2020 Olympics at this point?
He was making comments about that. That was in the article, right? They were saying basically he was trying to understand the cybersecurity posture of the Olympics is what I gleaned from it, but never having used a computer. That's bad.
And the problem is that we have politicians just like that.
We do.
Right now.
We do.
We have politicians that don't understand technology. You can see them grab their phone, go like this, and then you can see them.
Carlos, I'll tell you what. I'll admit something somewhat publicly that I voted in a specific way that would shock people that know me very well, because that particular representative is very in tune with cybersecurity. I've met him. I understand his story, and I understand that he very much gets technology. He would never say, I've never used a computer. I know that just from talking with him, I'm like, dude, you get it, right? That person got my vote, despite, much of my family going, why did you vote? I'm like, that person supports me and our mission here at Security Weekly, right?
Yep.
But that speaks volumes as to who we support and who is leading our city, our state, our government, is they have to have some kind of insight into technology. And I think that should really weigh in.
We've got a long way to go then. We've got a long way to go.
No, we do. And, Joff, I totally agree. And I think we should reward those politicians that not just get technology, but also get cybersecurity. And that's what swayed my vote in certain circumstances. I'm like, no. That person, I'm voting for the person. Right?
No.
Investors invest in technology and the people, and better yet, a combination of the two. But sometimes they got to pick either one. Sometimes they invest in the people. Sometimes with that, I invest in the people because they're the complete opposite of the Japan cybersecurity minister. I'm sorry, right? Like they get technology and security. You got to support those people, right?
All right, all you Solaris guys out there, I'm gonna say this: we need to F1A the swamp.
And you got my vote. You got my vote if you're supporting Solaris, right?
F1A. Just kidding. F1A, yeah.
Yeah, of course, that was technically Sun OS.
I still want the tattoo with the S's, the 4 S's.
Yeah, it was so cool.
I'm still thinking about it.
Actually, Solaris is how I ended up getting into networking of all fucking things. Oh, it's a family show. Anyway.
Before Solaris was open source, I worked for an organization where we bought the source code.
Yep.
So that was
thing.
Kind of fun. That was a thing.
Not just with Sun. That was with many Unix vendors at that time, Jeff, right?
Yep. Yes, I can neither confirm nor deny that.
You could steal it, or you could buy it, right? Like back in the day, that was a very much a thing.
Could and should are different words.
Well, actually, that comes from good roots because, way back when AT&T would ship you Unix on a tape, and it was the source code. You got the kernel, and you had to compile it.
Oh boy, where's Mitnick when you need him?
But those were the days.
Those were the days.
All right, let's not get. All right, let's stop the nostalgia.
Okay, next story.
April, you got some stories. I want to give you a chance as.
Come on, April.
One of your few appearances. How many times
She's
you've been
already done a
Is this
story.
your first appearance on Paul Security Weekly?
No.
No, it can't be, right? You've been here before. Not that many times.
I've been here before.
Maybe the first times you have stories in the wiki to talk about in this segment.
So I'd like to talk about, well, maybe, but.
The floor is yours. Okay. That's my point. Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Get to the point.
All right, let's go. The DJI security vulnerability. This tickles me from a security reader's point of view. If I was DJI, I'd be very terrified. So there was a DJI uses the same authentication between their forums and everything else, so that you could get into the DJI Flight Hub tool, for example, using a token that came through the forum, and they used some JavaScript and sent people to an offsite malicious site that was capturing all the tokens.
This was one of the things that struck me about this story, April, was that your login to the forum, and I can come up with 2 use cases, but I think there was 3, that I log into the forum, right, and that's the same token that also gives me access to the telemetry that's sent from my drone to the, cloud management software that lets me manage my drone, right?
You could watch your anybody's drone's video live stream as it was in the air. You could send them on routes. You could set routes for drones. You could get 100 drones and set them on a route to do something. Wow. So like what we saw at the Olympics last year with all the drones and everything.
I was thinking of what's the TV show?
I'm thinking of Suarez, one of his novels, where drones attack single places.
Black Mirror. I was thinking of Black Mirror.
What about
kind of like
Jeff? To answer your question, good question. The episode where the bees, where they control the bees. Yep. That's my favorite Black Mirror episode. That's where I'm thinking of, April, with relation to the story, right? Like, if you can control the drones, there's some power to that.
Well, imagine that, DJI is just one drone manufacturer. When we take this kind of threat model into the larger military drones, for example, and then we say, oh, you can get control of video, you can get control of telemetry, this is a major vulnerability. This is a major threat for drones. So even if the drone itself is secure,
which is it, a vulnerability or a threat? Because those are 2 different things.
It's both. It's both. It's both.
So there was a vulnerability in the architecture of how they did identity, but it's a threat to drones everywhere.
And going on your line,
the people in this case.
Right, yeah.
In Iraq, I remember there was a story in Iraq where soldiers got into this building. There was this laptop, and all of a sudden, when the exploitation team came over to exploit the site and get all the data out of the laptop and everything, one of the things they found was drone feeds, and they were going like, no, this is impossible. And one of the things that happened was that the U.S. decided, like, hey, the fighters that we're fighting don't have the capability of looking into our feeds, and we want our video to be faster, so let's not enable encryption that causes delay on our video feeds. So they disable encryption, and one of the things that the fighters learned how to do was to grab all of these satellite boxes that you use for TV, and they were able to reposition the antennas and program it so they can actually point it to the satellites that the Army, Air Force were using for their Reaper drones, and they were able to get the live feed of the drones, and they were going like, oh, look, they're monitoring this position over here, they're monitoring this other position over there, and they were recording all of that and taking battlefield decisions based on the same data that the U.S. was actually gathering. And it was because we thought that our adversary would never had that capability, so we disabled encryption. We never thought that one of our most stealthy drones could never be hacked, and then we had the situation in Iran when the Iranians actually spoofed GPS and made one of our Reaper Q something stealth drone actually land in their airport instead of back in its base in Afghanistan.
This is a traditional cloud vulnerability. I mean, we have IoT devices that are controlled by a cloud, and we are able to connect to them through that mechanism via tokens. I mean, this is not like a new vulnerability. It's just the way that it's the importance of the IoT, I guess, is what makes it so notable to me.
Yeah, we're going back to the old days. We fix a lot of this stuff in servers, and some of this stuff with server communication, we actually mitigated it. Now we're going back to IoT, and we're repeating the same bullshit again and again. How do we patch the servers? How do we patch the devices? Oh, I don't know. Let's figure out. Oh, authentication. Oh, we're just going to put a default password on all of them. It's going to be secure. They're supposed to be inside the network. They're never going to be exposed. We've heard that before in the 90s, in the early 2000s. We're just repeating that same error-prone process again with IoT.
Right. The crustacean security, where we have the boundary, and everything outside the boundary is, outside, and everything inside is safe.
Well, the military has a long, proud history of doing really stupid things. I mean, during the Vietnam War, the Air Force would file flight plans for their bombers with the FAA before making bombing runs. So how is this different? I also have a question, though, out of curiosity, since we're talking about drones real quick. Is there any legislation, any type of law right now that protects, that even defines what it is to own a drone, or any of the information that comes out of a drone, like a video feed? Is there any legal protection on drones themselves or the data that they produce in terms of security or privacy?
Jeff, it's a great question. I don't know that there are laws, guidance, or regulations on the data. There are certainly, when we interview Kevin Finisterre, for example, who one of my favorite people in the world, to bring on the show to talk about drones and really anything else, but the regulations, FAA regulations certainly exist for drones, but the data, that's a great question, Jeff. Like,
it's more about ownership.
Who regulates the data? I'm sure what
versus
the
ownership
regulations have to do with where the drone's flying.
Correct. Correct.
Not
not the data.
And there are regulations about what I can report.
There we go.
There you go, Carlos.
And this is one of my old ones. If I fly this...
Hold on, I'm watching you right now. Hold on.
Into your house and looking through the window, that is a violation of privacy. That is prosecutable by law in your state, by state laws. I'm not supposed to get
Wait, hold on, Carlos.
port inside.
I love you, Carlos. Known you for a long time. And Puerto Rico is a territory, not a state. So we need to clarify federal law versus state law versus like territory law. Do those laws translate into Puerto Rico?
Yeah, federal law does. State law, it's just like a territory, just like a state, decide their own.
Okay,
local
gotcha.
laws.
Yep.
So in the case that I fly my drone and I point it to your window, I'm looking through your window, that's still an invasion of privacy.
Trespassing.
Now, Carlos, I'm sorry, is that a federal law or a state law? Or are there laws that govern, different laws that govern from both aspects?
I'm pretty sure that's
it will vary from state to state.
It does vary. Okay.
Yeah, it might vary. I mean, technically, it's illegal to walk down the street and look in somebody's window. That's considered an invasion of privacy.
Yeah, as long as I'm looking.
Interesting.
Anything above the height of a building, I'm actually in FAA territory. I'm flying outside of your property. As soon as I go below your roof, I'm now invading your property. I'm inside of your property, and you can take action.
That makes sense. Okay.
And there is some legal gray area around people who hack their drones so that they can fly in no-fly zones, so that they can fly higher than they're supposed to, things like that too.
Exactly,
so there's
because
a lot of
the way that the FAA set it up is that these are recommended guidelines, what I'm giving you, for some stuff. For example, me flying inside of an airport or close to an airport, that is law. I'm not supposed to do it. I'm going to get fined. I'm supposed to actually call the tower and inform my flight plan to the tower before I actually fly my drone.
You know what's funny? When we had Kevin Finisterre on the show last, he said that the tower operators in the airport that he's near are tired of his phone calls. They're like, yeah, hey, Kevin, like, we know you're not gonna, like, they know Kevin's a good guy, and they, like, Kevin's one of the good guys. He doesn't want to impact any kind of commercial aircraft in any situation, but law requires that Kevin report to the airport, hey, I'm flying a drone, I'm not going above this altitude, but I still, by law, have to notify you, and the air traffic controllers are kind of annoyed by, like, hey, Kevin, like, yeah, you're cool, dude. It's totally fine.
So I feel like the Canada geese should be also auto-notifying so that we don't have bird strike is a major problem.
It's a thing.
I mean, we should have the large birds should all be automatically feeding in as IO the Internet of Birds.
We should be tagging them with some kind of chip.
We should be
right?
They should have some kind of chip so that when they enter airspace, the airplanes are aware and they can shut down an engine. I don't know how you avoid bird strike, but
before we move on to the next story, it's an interesting space. I track any company that is, for example, getting funding or in a certain category of security. Some of those companies are actually drone detection companies that are in that space that are getting funding, which kind of it kind of flirts the line with IT security. Like, you have to be of a certain profile to care about a drone that could be impacting your space.
Yes,
and I also there's some really cool companies.
I imagine that there is also a push, just like encryption, for there to be backdoors into those kinds of detection systems too. Because if there's a government-issued strike on something and there's an anti-drone technology, then the government would not want that to block their ability to do what they need to do.
There's, you're right, different sides of the fence, right?
Yeah.
And what is the one that we talked with that was really cool? A spotter RF, right? They were able to, detect not just drones, but anyone physically breaching your perimeter. And they were using RF to determine whether it's a drone, a person, or a group of people, using RF to fingerprint those that might be breaching your perimeter. And they were able to, my first question, once he went through like his spiel, was like, dude, how do you know whether it's a bird or a drone. But if you think about it, right, it's just math and like computer science, machine learning, AI that tells you this particular thing is behaving like a bird and this particular thing is behaving like a drone, right? You can totally see that.
So this gets us into the next thing that I really wanted to talk about, which is the Greek that I learned this week, which is bios metrikos, biometrics.
Did you say Greek?
Yeah, bios metrikos, the measurement of life. So when we talk about AI can now fake fingerprints.
Oh, I saw this story.
Yes. So this is so interesting to me because I'm really, my new thing is deep fakes. I'm like super interested in how all of these things are working and how we're trying to detect.
Deep fakes, like porn deep fakes?
Like that, yes.
Okay.
They're being used for other things, like imagine instead of porn, it's your president who's issuing a strike on a country that, you know.
I really separate the two.
Well, you know, VHS won because of porn, and it was not all VHS was not all porn, but it won because of porn. So
true. Yes.
So let's go with that.
Let's go with porn.
You know, the internet survived because of porn. I mean, to take that much further.
Yes.
I mean, let's face it.
I mean, Al Gore did invent it, but porn did perpetuate it.
Accurate statement. No one's going to disagree with you there.
So there's a new dictionary type attack against fingerprints. We've seen some things like this against the I don't know what it's called when you have like dots on Android and you have like a pattern matching type of thing.
Your passcode is a pattern.
Right.
Yes.
My pattern is my passport. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
so
my voice is my passcode.
So the way that they defend against this is called liveness detection, and that's against one type of attack. It's called liveness detection. So what's so interesting to me about this, and it gets into the deepfakes, and it gets into other things, is that we are now having to detect: is it a piece of tape with a fingerprint? Is it a printed finger? Is it a mask with your face on it? What are the things that we're trying to detect and then defend against? So there's a great paper that came out where they talked about like some of the different types of ways to detect liveness, like sweat, pulse, temperature, things like that. And so with AI being able to fake a portion of the most generic fingerprints, just like they were able to crack the whatever it's called, the dots.
But what's interesting is that early days of this podcast, Twitchy, who is Nick, when he was on our show when facial recognition first came out, and he would say, "Look, Paul, it's really easy. Like all I have to do is find a picture of you on social media, print it out." I hold that up in front of the facial recognition, and it works. However, I think Apple with the iPhone 10, right, or X or whatever you want to call it, when they came out, they managed to create a detection system that could defeat that. And I think that was a huge innovation in security, to be quite honest, right? But traditionally, when we...
What happened to April?
She disconnected again. She just keeps knocking her cable out. But when we think about like traditional facial recognition, right? We think of, I can take a picture of that person, which I can find on social media anywhere, and defeat facial recognition. The new iterations of that are able to detect that. However, you're talking about even further pushing into technology that we can detect that.
So yeah, they're talking about a defense being like randomization of put these fingers down, or randomization of turn your head this way and that way, and they're saying that even like video is still the most dangerous because you can replay video much easier than you can a 3D map of your face. And you can still fake that with masks, but the complexity required to fool biometrics is much easier. Like it's much easier to fool it than to bypass it.
So take a deep breath, everyone. Every technique that we come up, every technique we come up with that's a technology solution, safeguard, security feature, It's just a matter of time. Somebody's going to figure out how to defeat it. This has been going on for thousands of years,
Yes.
and it doesn't change just because things are faster and digital and blinky, and we rely on it a whole lot more. It's one of my big concerns, putting my curmudgeon hat on the reliance on so much technology is, just because something is newer and faster and it works better and it solves a problem, it doesn't mean somebody's going to figure out a way to defeat it. It might be a week, a month, a year. We mentioned Spectre and Meltdown a little while ago. Those at least when the first vulnerabilities were exposed, they'd been around for 15, 20 years. We just hadn't figured it out yet. An NSA chief scientist who, Paul, I know you've met and interviewed, said early in my career, what can be created by man can be broken by man. And as long as we're going to keep doing the technology thing, I think that's a truism.
Hold on, wait. Brian Snow?
Yes, Brian Snow.
Yes.
This is what's so exciting about security to me. And I don't know about other people, but like this one-upmanship of like, well, we do this and then the enemy does this and then we do this and then we have to, that's like what's so exciting, is being able to fix something.
Makes me so excited I would just dump this whole water bottle like right in my lap.
Now's when April needs to do the flash dance outro. Get the bucket of water for her.
Oh, Jeff, I wanted to talk about PCI.
I know you did.
Oh, no.
Let's talk PCI.
So I was reading this article, Jeff, and I'm turning over to you very quickly. But I read this article, and I want to say Preempt, which is a security company that I did a briefing with, and I have to say, like, I like their technology. And I'm going to be totally transparent with our audience as we do briefings. If there's a vendor that I really like their technology, I'm gonna say it on the show. I like their technology. Basically, they're looking at authentication in your environment for Active Directory and other single sign-on applications, and giving you some visibility into that. They wrote this article about PCI, about where PCI requires multi-factor authentication. And one of the things that I gleaned from this article, Jeff, was that PCI seems to take this spin that remote connections should require multi-factor authentication. What I liked about the Preempt solution is that anytime someone, external or internal, needs to deviate from their normal kind of operating procedures, access a server, you can require that they provide some kind of multi-factor authentication. I like that from their product. Jeff, how does that tie into PCI, right? Like, my whole thing was, don't just require externally. What if an attacker is internal and it's some phished user and they're trying to access stuff internally? Why not also require multi-factor?
Yeah, it's so easy.
Require the multi-factor authentication. But Jeff, how does this relate to PCI?
Sorry for interrupting, guys, but I have to go, just in case.
Thanks, Carlos. Nice having you on the show.
Good to see you, Carlos.
Same here.
Have a good night's sleep and wake up way too early. So, really quickly, the evolution of two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication in PCI. It used to be up until version 3. I forget exactly which iteration, 0, 1, or 2. It used to be that two-factor authentication was only required for remote access outside of your network into your network. The presumption in the early days of PCI was that your network was flat and everything was in scope. So with the prevalence of segmentation and descoping and isolating what they call the cardholder data environment, and with certain breaches in the last couple of years where it was discovered that the attackers were able to compromise point-of-sale devices because they were remotely administered by a third party, and they were using a shared password for every device, regardless of who the customer was, and so on and so forth. They updated and revised the PCI standard to require, and this is an important distinction, which I think partially addresses your question. they now require not just administrative access into your network to have multi-factor authentication. It's anybody logging in, especially third parties. And then they did add, and I apologize for not knowing exactly which version. It was one of the 3.2s that requires the acknowledgement that you have a network segmentation, so you've established what's called a cardholder data environment, and this is presumably an internal subnet or a set of subnets in your enterprise network, and to gain access to that isolated, nothing's supposed to be coming in and out of that segmented network. There's supposed to be air gaps and separation, which is another topic. Any access for whatever reason into that environment is supposed to have multi-factor authentication deployed. So PCI sort of does require what you're thinking it should require in terms of from an internal perspective, but their presumption is, and this is sort of the layered security concept, that the cardholder data environment is your most secure internal network, and everything else in your enterprise is untrusted. So what used to be considered your whole network, the idea of perimeter security, has now been sort of drawn into what you define as your cardholder data environment, and everything else, even your own network, is considered untrusted, and so the rules apply. Where I thought the article was interesting in terms of where it went wrong, in terms of no, that's not actually a PCI requirement, is where they said, and I had it a minute ago, they explain what PCI means by multi-factor, which is pretty much the traditional definitions. Sure. 2 out of the 3, something you have, something you know, something that you are. That's generally the 3 criteria for multi-factor authentication. And then they made the statement next, the 2 or more factors of authentication must have an independence of mechanism. That is not a PCI requirement. That might be a recommendation. That might be a logical thing, but that's not specified in PCI. And I think what they're saying is, you can't be logging in from your mobile device and also getting your 2-factor authentication token, your RSA token or whatever, soft token, also on your device, or have the device, having an SMS text giving you the second factor to log in. Smart, good idea, maybe, but not technically a PCI requirement. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Jeff.
I take all the fun out of the conversation talking PCI. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I feel like we just took a piñata and just beat the shit out of it right there.
It's a PCI-ñata.
It's a piñata.
Yada.
I mean, what the
title for the episode: PCI and yada. PCI and yada.
Try to spell that. Is that like a volcano in Iceland or something? I'm just trying to work it out.
PCI and yada.
And it's not filled with candy. It's filled with improvements.
Sometimes.
Oh, come on, April. Tell us, what is it filled with?
Come on, you got to finish the metaphor.
Sometimes I think, like, how are we going to create something like new for a title of the episode or describe something? April comes here to the studio, who clearly needs to be here every Thursday. Whatever your new job is, April, you need to make it clear that every Thursday night you need to be here on Security Weekly.
She's going to be our naked marketing executive HR person.
No, not that. I just want to
Nobody
clarify.
wants that.
I want to clarify, April.
Was that not
Don't
PC?
listen to what Joff is saying.
Like I said, you should hire me for HR.
We want you to be here every Thursday. That's what we're saying. That's what we're saying. And one of the benefits is PCI and
Yada.
PCI. Yes. What April said. I just my story number 7. And I was just like, wow, I couldn't believe this actually ended up on the internet. and I don't often say that. I find a lot of weird shit on the internet, and I found this to be very disturbing because people who have Active Directory have penetration tests, and they report those findings from the penetration test to Microsoft. And Microsoft, the fact that Microsoft had to come out and say, like, look, we're receiving so many of these reports that we need to write a blog post, just blew me away. Because I say, look, like, Microsoft gets basically pen test reports that contain a statement that about an attack vector or demonstration of how vulnerability could be exploited. However, often mitigations are available to our customers that do not require a change in the product or code to remediate the identified security risk. Like, I can't even believe we're having this conversation. That tells me that there are so many organizations out there that have Active Directory administrators that don't understand how to implement security controls, that it's concerning to me. I think there's a lot of problems with Linux or Unix security in our environment. However, they kind of, I think, delve into more of the details where there are a lot of organizations that implement Microsoft technologies that end up in this bucket. They're like, yeah, our pen tester told us this was vulnerable, and so this is a Microsoft problem. And Microsoft's like, yeah, maybe go through our training or understand how Active Directory works before you report to us this problem.
But Paul,
this was concerning to me.
It should be concerning to you, but I'm concerned maybe for similar and different reasons. But we're feeding the mentality that technology will solve the problem, and this is just an extension of the don't
technology
make me think about security.
Problem. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Technology is the problem, and this is an extension of the just tell me what kind of blinky box to buy and where to put it.
Right. I mean,
I object to the fact that the pen test reports are reporting vulnerabilities. I don't think, but that's a different topic. The fact that Microsoft, this whole blog could have been written and said, why don't you just install the daggone patches? But if you work with companies, if you get beyond the enterprise...
Well, not even patch, Jeff, but also configuration.
Also
right?
configuration, yeah. Yes. Trust me, again, I'm living the dream right now with a current customer where, PCI requires you to have a configuration standard. So I'm asking, okay, what's the configuration standard for a particular device? And what they're giving me is, well, we ran a little script to show you what services are running. I'm like, that's great. What am I going to compare that to? What's your configuration standard? What should or should not be running? And it's phone calls, but I know that they're just giving me these blank stares on the other end because they have no idea what I'm talking about. All they know is we got this box, it's running certain operating system. We slap the application on it and do a few network things, and we get it up and running, and we're done. So everything about this industry says, buy a blinky box. Don't have to think about security. Don't have to think about strategy or purpose, what you're trying to accomplish. Just use this thing and you'll be fine. And and Microsoft is no more guilty or less guilty of that than anybody else. And to Microsoft's credit, Windows is a whole lot more secure than it used to be. Active Directory, we've talked about several times on the air about the inherent vulnerabilities with it.
Jeff, even off air, right? Like we've talked about that. If Microsoft actually allowed people to properly secure Active Directory, how many security vendors would be out of business today? And I just want to call that out. And it's frustrating to me. However, on the flip side of that, I'm grateful that there are security vendors that are allowing us and us, I say us as security, but like enterprises to identify those gaps in their security program today with Microsoft technologies. If they actually built security from the get-go, so many technologies would be obsolete, but they haven't done that. Like, there are so many inherent vulnerabilities to Active Directory. As we've talked about with Javelin, I mean, Javelin has done so many segments on the show, right? Highlighting areas that are like, yeah, most people run Active Directory, and oh, by the way, it doesn't matter how much you monitor or maintain your Active Directory, there's always gaps. That's concerning for all of us in security, right?
It's true.
You glossed over a point, though, really quick, Paul, if I want to jump in, and that was if people actually took the time to architect and configure. It's not that Microsoft doesn't provide the tools. I've worked in environments, I have customers.
Got to do it right, right?
Who have done a good job of deploying application whitelisting, of securing access to the directory. The tools are there. It's a matter of taking the time to build it from the ground up.
I agree,
and
John.
there are very few that will actually take the effort and time to do that. But for those that do, and I do have customers in this category, they are seriously considering reducing, capture this, reducing the point solutions they have deployed because they no longer need them.
It's a great point, Joff, right? Like, focus on the Active Directory security issues, and you can cut out some vendors from that process because you're focusing on the core issues that not just people like Joff that are doing pen tests, but attackers, those techniques, right? Tactics and all that other stuff that they're focusing on, you can prevent against that by not implementing products, but securing your Active Directory.
So I walked away from this with a slightly different view about what one of the issues was, what one of the big issues was that we haven't talked about, which is that people are taking proprietary sensitive information about their penetration tests and sharing it outside of their organization without any kind of approval.
For Microsoft, you're right,
but
April.
I mean, we're taking, not we, but people are taking these very sensitive reports and
saying,
detailed
Microsoft,
information.
this is a problem.
And saying, hey, we're just going to send this off and like hope that somebody help us. Like, it's like a message in a bottle. Like, here's our location, here's what I'm allergic to, and
we got
here's
ordered
where
a pen test, and Microsoft help us with it. Microsoft's like,
but there's the privacy issue here is just as big as the the mindlessness about privacy. Where is it? I don't know what it is. Is it a button where you just say send this to Microsoft? I have no idea.
Well,
but
sure,
there should be some sort of. I mean, legal should be involved if you're going to send this kind of data to a third-party organization. I mean, like our vendors, we put a lot of trust in our vendors. Anyway.
Well, I think there's for the big ones though. I do think there is a mindset that comes down to. I think if I were to paraphrase it, they own me anyway, so why not? Right? It's a dangerous mindset. I agree with your proposition because it's like be careful with what you're sending out there, but on the other hand, I can see where people can fall into complacency when, hey, all the software I'm running here is Microsoft. I mean, like they're getting metrics and all kinds of things from me. Why not? So yeah, I can see that from both sides.
Well, as somebody who always clicks do not send information about my computer to the vendor or the software person or whoever, I'm the person who will not, if there's a crash, maybe I'll send it to you, but I will review the information that's being sent before I send it.
Last story. So
ATMs?
Damn.
Okay.
I was thinking that what we were talking about earlier in that privacy advocates have ranked the creepiest tech gifts of 2018. I want to end on that one. Because
I've got
you
one
and I both, April, we talked about the story before the show.
We did.
We were like, WTF.
Yeah.
Like, really? If you're going to call out security kind of mishaps with a product, have some data to back that up.
Not just opinion.
Yeah. This story was, you're exactly right, April, all about opinions about products that don't live up to your privacy and or security standards. And they called out so many products, and I'm like, where's your evidence to back up that either impacts your privacy standards, which are important. Don't get me wrong, I'm totally on board with that, but privacy and also security standards for that particular product.
So we're talking about
my story number 10.
So what you're saying is, if I send Christmas presents that's a head-bobbing dashboard doll of Harvey Weinstein, that's like bad taste?
No, well, I'm not going to say no, but it's more about like IoT devices. Is a baby monitor creepier than the Facebook portal, for example? Or and so it's like a rating. It's like a.
I'm gonna punt on that one.
I feel like this is. It's like a rating system where people say, I feel like this is creepier.
It was more about feelings. April's right. It was more about feelings than anything else, and not having hard evidence.
Right. But it is an interesting social experiment to see what non-security people might feel about.
Before Thanksgiving, I heard Christmas music on the radio today.
Well, there's already Black Friday threats.
And I wanted to vomit, in my mouth because I heard Christmas music. But
that wasn't because of Christmas music.
Maybe I was drinking before noon. But anyway, Christmas music, bad before Thanksgiving, but speaks to this article about what you want to buy technology-wise that might have security vulnerabilities. And I feel like they were just picking on things for the sake of picking on things rather than having actual evidence that this could impact your OPSEC or privacy. Right?
It was a lot of things with cameras. It wasn't necessarily the out-of-date D-Link router or whatever it was that still used. We have one of those
too.
Yeah, we have one of those too.
Maybe Paul,
you've got a good point. Things with cameras and mics on them take it to a whole new level, I think.
True.
If only you could figure out how to focus your camera, Jeff.
Figured it out. It's perfectly in focus. You're the one that's been drinking too much.
I don't know. You're like swing. It's like a whole thing.
It's a dance.
You keep doing the dips, April. What is under that table that you keep going after?
Hey, Paul, the moral of the story is understand your actual risk and not what mainstream press might be presenting as risk, right?
It's FUD.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I was going to say, Paul,
yeah.
You need to maybe tweak the parameters of your article searching tool, whatever it is you're using, because some of these articles are like they're writing it because they have something to write about. But very quickly.
Yeah. But that's on purpose, Jeff, right? To point out articles that are preying on people's FUD, right?
Right.
Versus articles that are actually pointing out an actual security vulnerability, right? Like when we talk about vulnerability, we like to talk about vulnerabilities that impact people that they should think about versus ones that are preying on FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
And I noticed I went to at least one of them. It had a little, we have reviewed this graphic, and it said this is we have reviewed this for security graphic. Basically, and we recommend it or something like that. So
it had a seal of approval.
It was basically a seal of approval.
Hey, Paul, I want to trump your last story real quick.
Yeah.
And I think you'll be forgiving. I found an article. I think it just posted today, and the title of it is "Meet Brad, the guy keeping your vibrator safe from hackers."
I saw that. I saw that.
It's a whole article about Brad Haynes.
But Jeff, I look at that as a good thing. I think that Viceland, as a network, they have a TV show. Have you seen it, April, and others that are on the panel?
Show?
It's cyber something.
Oh, cyber something. Yeah, of course.
Wow, that's descriptive.
I'm doing it.
Got robot in it too.
All right, hold on. I'm doing it. Hold on.
Do they wear black T-shirts and do they have beards?
Back
and
off.
Are they bald?
Are they wearing
hold
hoodies?
on.
Even the women have beards. It's
back
awful.
Off. Hold on. Back off. Because Viceland produces TV shows that I like, okay? One of which is centered around cybersecurity. What is it called? I can't remember it. But anyway, They do some great investigative journalism around cybersecurity. They do a great job with it, and they bring that message to the not just security people, but the audience as a whole, right? Vicen does a good job of that. And so whatever references I have in there, Jeff, that you might like tie back to Viceland, they have a great show on cybersecurity. So
cyber something.
Cyber
whatever.
Cyber whatever.
Dot, dot, dot.
Yeah. We'll just call it Cyber Robot Hoodies.
It's my favorite show. Cyber whatever, dot, 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 hoodies, something.
Hoodies, robots.
In parentheses.
Hack all the things.
New Jersey.
Hey, I think somebody should take us out at this point.
Thank you, Joff. You know what? April, take us out. All you have to do is say over and out.
Thank you for being here on Pulse Security Weekly. It's been really fun. We've talked about some really bizarre things. And
she really doesn't follow instructions very well.
Take us out.
Over and out.
Over and out.